talking about the physical side of the game tonight, right? For how we take care of ourselves and eating. We talk about the technical, the tactical, the mental, the lifestyle, and the physical piece tonight. In a moment, I'm going to introduce Dr. Nick. I've been working alongside Dr. Nick at Next Level for the last number of years. I don't remember how long now, with the partnership that we have with NCAA Crush, our soccer club that we work with. And the reason for that is everything that they help us with in the personalization, and they assess the athletes and allow them to do rehab. They do rehab there, along with a bunch of other assessments. And these guys are fantastic. Anytime I have a question, guys I go to. So Nick's going to take it over in 1 second, right? He's going to jump in about ACL rehab, prevention, right? And obviously rehab as well. And then Dr. Price is going to come in after that. And Dr. Nick, you'll introduce him.
Absolutely.
So, Dr. Nick, everyone.
Hey, everybody. How you doing? Thank you guys so much for being here tonight and having us here tonight. My name is Dr. Nicholas Das. Dave just tell me if I need to stay in one place or if you're going to follow me. All right, I'll do my best. I'm a PT. I'm not good at that. So I'm going to start right over here. So tonight I'm going to be talking about the 3 absolute musts of ACL rehabilitation. Perfect. Got that going there. So the reason I'm talking about, you're going to see a trend tonight between what I'm going to talk about and what Dr. Price is going to talk about. We're really going to talk about ACL rehab and concussions. And the thing is, when you play sports, any sort of athletics, these are inherent risks with them. And we think that with the degree of, are we going to have a successful outcome or not? If we're going to plan for an emergency, we want to plan for it before the emergency happens. We don't want to wait till after, because, for example, with an ACL tear, as soon as that happens, a whirlwind of things happen after that. So the reason that PJ had us come out here today is I want to help educate you guys from the beginning on this and really help you guys get one step ahead of the game. Because unfortunately, no matter how hard we try to prevent these things, it is a part of sport. So it's good that you hear this stuff now versus later. See if the clicker works. Perfect. So I'll just talk about the clinic I work for. So I work for a clinic called Next Level Physio. We are a sports physical therapy practice. We're located in Woodcliff Lake, New Jersey. We're maybe like 9 minutes away from here. And we're also in Montclair. So we cover Bergen County and Essex County. And if you find yourself in North Carolina, we have 2 clinics out there. We specialize in helping the athlete and the active adult. We're not the run-of-the-mill physical therapy practice where you get the script, you come in, you do your band exercises, and then leave. We care about the goal. We care that all these athletes here want to play sports. Parents, you guys might have sports that you still do yourselves, and we care about the end goal. So this isn't a place where rehab is just a box you check off. We really care about the quality of how things are done. So a little bit about me. Again, my name is Dr. Nicholas Das. I am a sports orthopedic physical therapist. On top of that, I am also the lead strength and conditioning coach for the Montclair State Division III women's soccer team. I enjoy the time I spend out there. We do a lot of work with ACL. I'm an avid ACL rehab enthusiast. That is a rehab. I really believe that is, you'll see today, the statistics on it, I think we all know, like, yeah, ACL rehab is a thing, but the statistics could be a lot better. And I'm going to put the onus on my profession for more of us to come out here and do talks like this, because if we do the education right on the front end, I think the outcomes in the rehab get a lot better. And my goal overall, no matter who I'm seeing, ACL or not, my goal as a physical therapist is to help people have a better relationship with exercise through movement. So that's a little bit about me. So my goals of today's presentation. So like PJ said, we're going to talk a little bit about prehab, but I really want to show you guys why these statistics matter. After that, I'm going to do a little brief anatomy education, because whenever I do these talks, I'm like, wait, we should talk about what the ACL is. We're going to talk about what happens when an ACL tears. So the sequence of events that happen from there and what we should do after that. And after that, we're going to talk about the 3 musts that will increase your likelihood of being a successful outcome. God forbid, an ACL tear occurs. So why is this important? So ACL tears in sports rehab, it's nothing short of an epidemic. Every year, the statistics get a little bit worse. So on average, every year in this country, 250,000 people tear their ACLs. And that number is just getting higher and higher. In female athletics, that number is going up by 1.8% every year. And for male athletics, at 0.96. And that may not seem like a big deal, but when you compound that over 20 years, it's kind of why we keep just seeing these injuries come through our doors. And we want to stop them from happening before they happen. So do you have any women's soccer in here? Because that is okay, so we got a couple. So I have some alarming statistics, and I'm not trying to scare anybody, but for every year that you participate in soccer in high school, you have a 5% chance of tearing your ACL. If you compound that over 4 years, there's 4 years of high school, that's a 20% chance. So for every female soccer player you know in high school, if they're playing year-round 4 years, they have a 1 in 5 chance of tearing their ACL before high school is over. And that to me is kind of an unacceptable number, but the statistics get a little bit worse after that. So I think we've all heard of an ACL tear, and it sounds so common that you would think that, hey, these guys have it figured out right by now. Like, we should be able to get this done with 1, 2, 3. But our statistics are showing us that out of everybody who tears their ACL, only 55% of people make it back to sport, which is just barely better than a coin flip. So if somebody tears their ACL, it's like a 1 in 2 chance whether or not they make it back to sport at the same competitive level that they were at. And we're going to talk about prevention a little bit, but the important thing is, I just had a kid come in yesterday, new ACL tear. She had torn her other ACL a year ago, made it back to sport in June. She tore it about 3 weeks ago. Somebody hit her other leg. So that's about to be 2 years of ACL rehab back to back for this poor kid. So no matter what we do, as much as we've talked about prevention, we can't stop a contact tear. So it's important for us to have an idea about this stuff. And I will repeat a few things. Like I've already said, I think everybody in here at some point is going to know somebody who's going to tear their ACL. And if you can take some of this presentation away for them, I think that you give them a better chance to have a more successful recovery. Again, we are only just doing better than a coin flip, right? So now let's take that coin flip, the 55% of people that make it back to sport. Out of those 55% of people, the statistics don't get better. So now there's a 30% chance if you make it back to sport, you tear your other ACL or you tear the same one again. So that is basically 1 in 3 chance that you're tearing your ACL again. And there's a lot of things, like these statistics are scary, but I think the answers lie in better rehab. So I don't want this to just be doom and gloom. This is something I believe we can do something about. And again, this presentation was initially designed for women's soccer, but female athletics, you guys have it so much harder. After you guys go through an ACL tear, you're significantly more likely to tear the other one. So the onus is on the rehab to be really good and for everybody to work hard. And out of all the kids that are in the room today, it's not just about them playing sport today in high school or college, because they're all going to grow up, they're all going to be adults. And my job and all of our jobs is to give them a good relationship with health, movement, and exercise. We're the PT place where people come in and they may not have been getting good results somewhere else. And it's the worst thing to see a kid who's just like, I'm not getting better. My shins are always burning. My knee always hurts. My back always hurts. And then it puts a bitter taste in their mouth about sports. And then that translates over to recreational exercise. And our goal is really to just make stronger and better movers. So I promised a little brief ACL education. So I'm going to make this super easy. So what is the ACL? It is a strong ligament that connects our femur, this thigh bone right here. It connects it to our tibia. So there's a ligament that goes between there, and really what it does is it prevents the shin bone from sliding forward on the thigh bone. And we'll talk about why it tears in a second. But it is the most commonly injured ligament in the knee. I think we have a whole lot of sports here, and I think other people will watch this later. The highest risk athletes for non-contact tears are skiers. Does anybody ski here? Okay. Do your strength training. That will help prevent the ACL tear. But skiers, soccer players, and basketballs, you guys are the highest risk for non-contact tears. When we start to talk about contact tears, obviously football is going to be in there, soccer, basketball, and volleyball. So predisposing risk factors for tears. I don't want to spend too much time talking about this tonight, because at the end of the presentation, we're going to have a QR code. You guys will be able to scan it. The owner of our practice, he wrote a whole ebook on these factors. But I just want you guys to know that some of the risk factors that can predispose an athlete to tears: anatomy and hormonal influences, specific strength deficits, like when the muscles are out of whack here, it can predispose the athlete to a tear. Their ability to move and control, like especially female athletes compared to male athletes, when they get to that pubescent age, there's a lot of things that we need to start working on to help protect them from the likelihood of tear. If they are overtraining or playing the same sport year round, that increases their chances. And, nutritional deficiencies. I think we're in a day and age where athletes are working harder than ever at younger ages, and that's fine, but we have to give them every advantage we can give them. So these next two slides, I'm gonna make super simple. So there's Q angle and there's valgus. So I'll ask you guys, at whatever sporting event you go to next, especially if it's basketball, volleyball, soccer, watch how the athletes land. They'll stand right here in the middle. So when they jump, you may see a little something like this, where the knees dive in. Anybody ever see that before? Okay, so that is called knee valgus. So that angle right here, this one right here, is a ton of stress on the inside of the knee and the ACL. When athletes start to land like this, it becomes a very big problem. So it's not just landing, because that's not all athletes do in sport. They're going to cut, they're going to turn, they're going to accelerate. So the way that is most likely to tear an ACL, you plant the foot, right? You're either changing direction, decelerating. Sometimes if you're playing on turf or even grass, your foot gets stuck in the turf. There's another athlete on your foot. You get stuck here, you're trying to get out of that position. And sometimes an athlete hits you, somebody else hits you in the leg and it tears, or you've just been programmed to do the same type of movement pattern, like thousands and thousands of faulty reps because the strength training wasn't good, and then that ACL ends up giving away. So I think the biggest part of the prevention talk that I'm going to go into today, athletes, no matter what sport they play, they need to be strong enough to get themselves out of the positions that they're putting themselves in. Whether you're on the ball or you're a defender, if you can't be strong enough to get yourself out of this, over time, it is going to be a risk of an ACL tear. So when you see that kid on the field where you're like, they look a little slow out of their step and they didn't look like that before, that should always set off alarm bells to have them checked out, because that's typically what we start to see before a tear occurs. And I think this is just a good example. If you look on the picture on the left, we're seeing this athlete trying to make a cut. There's a lot of knee collapse, a lot of hip drop. Over here, the alignment's a little bit better, and she's pushing out a little bit stronger. So now let's talk about what happens when an ACL tears. Has anybody here ever seen an ACL tear happen real time? Okay, a lot of people. So hopefully this scans. So the sequence of events, the person is going to tear their ACL. It's either going to be contact or non-contact. There's either going to be pain or no pain. Sometimes they get right back up, they start walking, they have another fall, or they're just on the ground and they can't get off. They're just screaming. After that, their knee is going to it's going to get stiff and it's going to lose its ability to bend and extend, okay? After that ligament tears, a lot of blood rushes into the joint, so it's going to swell up. And then the biggest thing I want you guys to take away, if any of your athletes have a knee injury and they start to complain about instability, get them checked out right away. Either send them to a PT or the doctor. We will probably end up sending them to the doctor if we hear instability. But that instability could lead to buckling. And in the event the ACL is torn, it's probably not going to cause more damage, but we don't want them walking on that too much at first. We'll talk about what they should do. And the walk will look a little something like this. Once all that swelling is in there and everything is stiff, they're not going to be able to get their heel on the ground. They're going to have a shortened stride length, and it's going to look like a little bit like a limp here. The next step should always be get them over to us, the doctor. You send them to us, again, we're going to get them over to the doctor. We're going to get a picture of that knee, and then we're going to know whether or not the ACL is torn. So now, let's say we have an athlete who has torn their ACL. Here's where some of the expectations get a little mismatched. So whenever an athlete tears an ACL, the statistics on the left, the first two were taken from a study. In that study, 100% of the patients thought, yeah, my knee is going to be totally the same after I have the surgery, right? You're going to give me a bionic leg. It'll be perfect. But in actuality, when we take the professional athletes out of that statistic of half of people returning to sport, 42% of non-professional athletes end up ever making it back to sport. 98% of people expected no increased risk of arthritis. So at the 10 to 20 year mark in this study, half of the people who tore their ACL ended up having arthritis. Now, if we're talking about like a 16-year-old tearing their ACL, the thought isn't going to be on arthritis, but you have to remember they're going to be adults one day. that could catch up with them over time. Sometimes the arthritis is happening because of bad rehab, or sometimes there's just enough impact in that knee where the arthritis will set in anyways, but we really want to focus on the rehab to make sure that it's good. Out of those athletes that tear their ACLs, I don't know, you guys all know athletes here, they want to get back to sport as soon as possible. So the biggest thing that we hear is, oh, I'll be back to sport 5 to 6 months. I got the season coming up. I'll be back. But in actuality, any athlete that returns before 9 months, they are 7 times more likely to have another tear of their ACL. So another big key takeaway, ACL rehab should really be 1 year long. It shouldn't be any shorter than that, in my opinion. I think when we rush kids back, that's when we risk having that other tear. And another thought that a lot of patients have, the things I do before the surgery don't matter. They think they don't matter because the ACL is already torn. That could not be farther from the truth. And we're going to talk about that. That's going to be in our 3 musts. But the things that we do, the preoperative physical therapy could not be more important. In my opinion, every ACL I see, when they do a full course of pre-op rehab, their immediate post-op rehab is so much easier. So all that stuff really does matter. So let's get into the musts. So we have this athlete, they tore their ACL, they went to the doctor, imaging confirmed we have a torn ACL. What do we do next? The very first thing I think we all need to take away, you have to prepare for the surgery very, very, very well. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. So first step, you find a trusted surgeon, you get a referral from us, you go online, you look up their research, their statistics, what have you. You don't delay the prehab. So if we look in the picture up on the top, we see this person's leg. Is there a laser pointer on this thing? Yes, okay. So right here, we see this muscle on the front. I want everybody, if you can, you have space, kick your leg out, just like this. Squeeze the muscle right above your knee. Okay, for the rest of the presentation, everybody remember, this muscle is called the quadricep, okay? So that muscle right there, as soon as you tear your ACL, that thing wants to turn off, okay? And again, we also talked about knee bend and knee extend. This right here is called knee flexion. What you just did right here, knee extension. I promise you, you will always walk. You can walk without a whole lot of this. You can walk perfectly normally without a whole lot of this. You try walking even without a little bit of this, your walk is going to be worse. Things are going to be worse. And that's the biggest thing that we see. That is like the #1 disconnect that we get with successful and not successful outcomes early rehab. If you can't get this muscle going, we have a problem. So here's what happens. The ACL is torn, right? The kid is in pain. The knee is swollen, they're freaking out. What do you want to do? You want to make your kid feel better, right? So then you end up putting a pillow underneath their knee until they see the doctor. This, not good. Because this may be comfortable, but we have to get this range of motion right here as fast as possible. So having a pillow underneath the knee, can everybody see my leg? Does this, right? We want this thing, if you're gonna put a pillow somewhere, put it underneath their ankle. That is the biggest thing that you can do to help them. It's a little bit of short-term discomfort, but when they are walking normally at week 6 after surgery, it is so much better for their mental health than like it's week 12 and we still haven't figured out how to get that muscle back, okay? Cool, so again, knee extension, gotta get this back as soon as possible. Okay, here's the criteria to know that you did a good job before the surgery, because the prehab that we'll say, it's about 1 month long. Like you gotta do that for a month, you're gonna go back to the surgeon. If you found a good surgeon, they're gonna look for these 4 things. They're gonna look to see that you restored almost all the knee motion. So here's a myth. If you think that you had ACL tear and the knee can't move until you get back, till you get the surgery, it's not true. You should be able to do this and this before the surgery. The swelling. There should be little to no swelling before you go into the surgery. That makes the surgeon's job so much easier. They have less stuff to get out of the way. You want to be able to keep your leg perfectly straight while laying on your back and be able to raise it up. And again, quadriceps, this muscle right here, we got to get it as strong as possible, and that is our second must. So now, the patient had the surgery. They now had their surgery. We got to get this quadricep muscle working as fast as possible, and we do not delay it under any circumstances. Okay, these look like 2 different legs from 2 different people, but this is a quadricep that is healthy and strong. This is one that shut itself off after the surgery. See that nice scar right there? This thing is not working for them. They're not going to walk normally, and that muscle turns off. If that doesn't get back soon, we run the risk of having arthritis happen over the long term. But I always ask all my patients this question. If you had to take a guess, I think most people have heard of RICE, rest, ice, compression, elevation. If you had to take a guess out of the 4 of those, what would you say is the one thing that, gets the swelling out the fastest? I always tell my patients, it's a trick question. It's the 5th option. It is getting the muscle to contract as much as possible. The better the muscles pump, the more fluid we're pulling out of that joint. So if you ever have an athlete with a swollen knee, I promise you, you get this muscle, that muscle looking like this muscle. See how you can see all the landmarks and all the lines here, and it just looks puffy here? That goes away because that muscle gets strong again. The quadricep muscle, biggest takeaway here, is the key to normal walking post-op ACL rehab. That's one of my patients. That is day 3 post-op. This is 3.5 months post-op, and I got this picture. She ran like 8 miles by this point. So if you think like you're not able to run after ACL rehab, no. By week 12, we're looking for you to be able to run. Really, the biggest problem that we're going to see is the cutting, the jumping, the landing. That always comes towards the end. But you can have a very active athlete during their ACL rehab. You just need the right people doing the rehab and the surgery. Okay, 3rd must, and this is you have to care about how you perform your exercises. And now we don't even have to talk about ACL rehab anymore. We can just talk about any rehab. If we don't care about how exercises are being done, we have a problem. So for example, one of my patients, he's totally cool with me using this picture. We have this picture on the right here, or your left, my right, so right here, and then one right here. The first picture, patient reports little to no quadriceps burn. What is the most important muscle in ACL rehab? Quad, in the beginning, right? On the right side here, patient reports feeling quadricep work, and he's got no pain in the front of his knee. This is what it looked like when I had my back turned. I said, hey, whoa, Justin, we got to get this thing here. That's what we need to do. That's going to be better. And immediately he goes, nope, I feel the right muscles working. And if you go to PT anywhere and they're not looking at how you're doing the exercises, I think that is the differentiating factor between rehab that goes well versus rehab that doesn't go well. So we have this picture here. Cool. So we just talked about the quad. What do we also care about? Extension, right? He's trying to push a sled here. This is what it looked like the first time. This is a reenactment because I asked him to show me what he was doing first. This is what it looks like when we're doing it right. First part, we're not getting any active knee extension. So let's say you do 6 months of rehab and every one of your sled pushes that you did for 6 months looked like that versus the sled pushes you did that looked like this. This picture is the difference between you going back to your surgeon and saying, they go, things are okay. You've done rehab for 6 months, but the results show you're not strong enough to start to think about going back to sport. This picture, when every rep is done with purpose and intention, this is when we get surgeons going, who did your rehab? I need them to do more of the patient's rehab. So we really have to care about this stuff. And how does this apply to other injuries? Like I said, I'll give you guys the secret to PT right now because the answer is in the implementation, not the solution. Any injury, we're basically looking to restore the range of motion as efficiently as possible. We want to restore the strength of the muscles around it as fast as possible. And then we want to go back here and care about the angles that we're making our patients execute on each exercise. The same way we care about it, how it looks in practice, we got to care about it the same way in PT. So we'll do a little more after. We'll talk a little bit more about ourselves. Feel free to scan this, by the way, you guys. Take your phones out. You can scan this QR code. We'll try to get it over to you later as well. But I want to introduce Dr. August Price. He works for Bellapianta Orthopedics. We're going to talk about concussions, and we'll do Q&A for both topics at the end. Cool? All right.
There we go.
There you go.
All right, man, what an uplifting evening we have for you guys. We get to talk knee injuries and now brain injuries. I'm going to try to keep this as light as I can when it comes to concussion. We'll kind of go through everything from some preventative factors that you can do. We'll talk about the diagnosis of the injury, what to look for, how you might know you have a concussion, and then we'll talk a little bit about just what the rehab looks like. But my name is August Price. As Dr. Nick mentioned, the concussion program director for Bellapianta Orthopedics and Sports Medicine. I completed a 2-year sports concussion fellowship down in Dallas, Texas at the James Andrews Institute. And then currently have a research appointment as well with Montclair State University. Today we're going to talk concussion safety 101. Maybe. All right. So one of the things I want to do, it's late. I like to keep things a little bit light. I want to keep you guys awake. So we're going to play a game as we go through this talk tonight. I call it concussion myth or fact. All right. And one of the reasons I like to do this, not only does it keep you awake, there are actually a lot of myths out there when it comes to concussion. Okay. There's a lot of misinformation that we sometimes hear in the media. So one of the things we're going to do tonight is we're going to debunk some of those common myths. And just by listening to the talk, by following along with the slides, it should be fairly easy to answer the myth or fact questions, and we'll kind of go through those as we work our way through. So everybody here, if you've watched sports or you've participated in sports, you likely have at least, you know what a concussion is. You've probably seen a concussion, whether it's on TV, you might know someone that's had one, maybe you've even had a concussion yourself at some point. Is anyone in this room, any brave soul in this room, willing to give me a one sentence quick little definition about what you think a concussion is? All right, we've all seen it, but what is the injury? Yeah. Yeah, all right, that's good. That's actually, that's even more in depth than I was looking for. Very good. So yeah, that is how a concussion is caused. But it is, in a way, that's what a concussion is. I like to keep it even more simple than that. I have a little one-liner we like to use here. It's an injury to your brain that results in temporary loss in our normal brain functions, or temporary changes in normal brain functions. And the key word there is temporary. Okay, so these changes are not permanent. You're not at risk necessarily for a permanent injury of any kind when you get a concussion. Everybody does recover eventually, but it can be sometimes pretty debilitating in the moment, especially early on. And there's a lot that we can do to help people move through a concussion and hopefully promote a faster recovery. But it's important to understand a little bit about what the injury is. So when I talk about this injury, I like to go over just in brief kind of how you can get one. We had our A+ student up front give us a little bit of an intro. When it comes to sports in particular, the most common way that we'll sustain a concussion is through what's called this acceleration and deceleration injury. So for most sports, it's when you are moving quickly, your body's in motion, thus your head is in motion, and then it stops immediately. Okay, there's that rapid deceleration because you have collided with something. Often it is another player, sometimes it's the ground, or sometimes it's a wall, and that does cause the brain to move around inside the skull, and it can cause that can cause a concussion. Okay, it's a concussive force. Similarly, we have direct impact injuries that will occur. That's when something else has hit you. All right, so you're standing either still or you're moving a little bit, but there's an object that has been thrown, or like a volleyball, baseball, and it hits you in the head and causes that same brain movement inside the skull. Now, importantly, you actually don't even need head contact at all. Okay, it's a little bit more rare in sports injuries, but we see this a lot in car accidents. Enough whiplash from an impact from movement will also cause a concussion to occur. It's that same movement of the brain inside the skull. It's important to note that if you do get the feelings, and we'll talk about what those are in a moment, after enough whiplash, you can have a concussion as well. The majority of concussions, of course, we understand this at this point, do not result in any loss of consciousness. That's kind of an older way of thinking about the injury. They used to say you had to lose consciousness to some degree. We now understand that even just very brief altered consciousness, sometimes people say they don't feel anything at all and they didn't notice that they went out even at all. That can still mean that you have sustained a concussion, does not rule it out at all. In fact, most injuries do not involve any. Concussion affects many things. Okay, it affects many neurologic functions. It even affects some psychological functions. Our mental health can be impacted. We're going to talk about what a couple of those look like, but anything from your cognition, that's like your thinking, your reflexes, your balance, your muscle coordination, eye movements, all these things can be impacted by the injury. It's a fairly complex injury as it's involving the most complex organ in the world, okay, your brain. In my clinic, you'll never hear me use the word a mild or minor concussion. Okay, we really try to stay away from words like that because it is an injury to your brain. We want you to take it seriously, and I've found that if I call it mild or minor, people seem to think they don't really need to worry about it too much, and they kind of go about their normal lives and maybe jump back into sports a little bit too soon or into whatever other activities might cause another injury. And of course, the main reason we do this is that a second injury does not have to be very impactful, very forceful to cause potentially permanent disability, and it can even result in death. It can be fatal. Okay, it's relatively rare. It's called second impact syndrome, but it is a concern. This is one of the reasons that we always keep somebody out if they have had a concussion. You do not want to put yourself in a position to be hit again. And we're going to go over, I should say, a video in a moment that will show us this. Does anyone here watch the NFL? Do you guys like, the NFL? Yeah, of course. So if you watched it all last year, there was it was on national television, a nationally televised game. Tua Tagovailoa, is still the Dolphins quarterback, went through a very scary injury on the field. He sustained a concussion on a Sunday, and then 4 days later, he was cleared to return to play, which is, as we'll get to, that is too soon to be returning back to play. And he sustained what could have been a life-threatening injury and what could have been permanently disabling, and was very scary for everybody watching as well. And he ended up missing many, many months thereafter. As a professional football player, he did return back to sport. A lot of people would have been retired, though, after that play. What I'd like to show here, though, not necessarily just to scare you with the Tua video, he actually represents a really interesting way to look at to observe what a concussion looks like on the field. And what I think it's helpful for coaches, parents, anybody in the room is to kind of get a sense of what I would look for on the sidelines of, let's say, a football game or a soccer game. All right, some of the things that I'm looking for when I'm worried that someone sustained a concussion. And there's really three basic things. Some of the three easiest ways to think about it. First and foremost, so after, I try to observe at least some sort of blow to the head, right? You want to see either a big hit, kids on the ground, they're getting up slowly. Maybe you watch them collide head to head. They're going for a header in soccer. Basketball fell quickly off the rim and it kind of just shook them like this on the head. There's some direct impact that we're observing. The first thing I'm looking for is, do they attempt to shake it off? All right, sometimes we call this the Taylor Swift sign. Do they attempt to shake it off, right? That one's for those in the back. And we've all seen it before, right? They get up and it's one of these. They kind of do this. I'm cool. Yeah, I'm good. This is fine. You kind of watch them. You observe a very brief shake it off moment. That has my attention right away. All right, at that point, I'm eyes locked on that athlete. I want to see what they do next. Next, I'm looking for any changes to their gait or their balance. Okay, and by gait, I mean how they move, how they walk, how they run. Is there anything notable about the way that athlete is now moving thereafter? Take a couple steps. Again, we're going to see it in a moment. And then finally, and this is what I rely on, honestly, parents and other players to help me out with sometimes, do they do anything that's unusual for that player? Okay, is there something that's just odd about their behavior? Sometimes it's really obvious, but sometimes you have to rely on other people, right? Like, hey, does Johnny always line up the wrong way? Is he always facing the wrong way? Does he usually miss that play entirely? Like, something seems off about what Johnny's doing, right? Let's pull him off and take a look. So, unfortunately, but in some ways, fortunately, Tua gives us a great example of these three things during his first injury. So this is what happened on a Sunday game. I'm just realizing, should I hit next and see what happens? Play. It's not it. That was the aftermath. How do I make it play? Maybe, yeah, the video should, yep, okay. So we're going to look first for a blow to the head. Okay, we're watching the player, boom, pause, blow to the head, very obvious, falls backward, hits his head on the ground. Now I'm looking for, what does he do next? Do I see a shake it off? There's one, another one, two. I'm cool. That was fine. I can walk this off. Next, we're looking for any observable changes in gait or balance. Immediately down. Now, it's not always going to be that obvious, but that's a very clear-cut sign that that is an injured brain. And next, I'm looking for unusual behavior. And I would consider this to be unusual at the NFL level. All right, there's two players come up and hold him up, and he's reaching for his helmet. Okay? Athletic trainer, he knows exactly what's going on. They've got really good staff. He comes running right out immediately and takes him aside, right? He's well aware of what he's looking for. But I think it's helpful to kind of see what this looks like on the one hand, because they did do the right thing initially. Okay, that trainer came out and they pulled him out of the game and he did not go back in that game. However, he did play 4 days later. They decided to call it a back injury. God knows why. And he went back in, and of course, if you were watching that game on a Thursday night, this is what happened. And he took a much, much lighter blow to the head. Okay, he fell backward once more, and he had what we call, in my field, it's called a fencing posture. Okay, and that indicates that there's been brainstem involvement in the injury. Okay, and our brainstem is vital for keeping us alive, for keeping us breathing, for keeping us conscious. and he fell, and he immediately had hands up like this, and as you can see closely, again, not to make this too graphic, but his eyes are completely closed, and he was out for a period of time like this on the field. Very lucky to even still be here with us. Okay, this is the importance of why you must not return to play if there's a suspected concussion. So we want to avoid anything that looks remotely like that. I think we can agree. Okay, let's lighten it up a little bit. Do our first round of myth or fact. We're going to start with a few softballs. Concussion is a brain injury that needs to be taken seriously. Myth or fact? Yes, fact. Absolutely, that one is a fact. You must lose consciousness to sustain a concussion, to cause a concussion. That is a myth. Yes, absolutely. At this point, we understand about 90% or more of concussions do not involve loss of consciousness. And then, of course, you must hit your head to cause a concussion. We talked about it before. That is now a myth. Yes. Again, these are things that were not that well known even a decade ago. A lot of people would have told you have to lose consciousness or you must hit your head. These are things that we understand now, even just 10 years later, about this injury. But I'm glad that it's at least obvious to this crowd. Okay. I'm going to skip this one because I give this talk often, of course, to football teams where we see a lot of concussions. But when it does come to preventative measures, there are things that you can do in any sport. And the main takeaway from a message like this is if you are playing the game properly and you're using proper technique and you are following the rules as they are laid out in that given sport, generally speaking, a lot of them are in place to prevent injury. Okay, sometimes we have fouls and other plays that involve just the natural, the game and to make it fair, but a lot of them are in place to not hurt people as well. And so if you are, tackling properly in soccer as well is extremely important, right? Not using cheap shots or not doing something that could potentially hurt somebody else. That is a great way to prevent any injury from occurring, and particularly a head injury. Additionally, I would add too, I get this question quite a bit. There is some interesting literature out there about the strength of one's neck and being able to withstand impacts to the skull and to the brain. There's, again, I wouldn't tell you should all go home and spend each night of the week strengthening your neck to hopefully prevent a concussion, but there's something out there that they're seeing, and I think it's at least worthwhile to continue to strengthen your neck in addition to other parts of your body. And importantly though, and you could do absolutely everything right, and the reality is concussions are still going to occur. Okay, there's nothing that we could do. I would not have a job if there was something we could do to prevent them completely. Okay, they're still going to happen, and it's okay if it does happen because we do have a lot of great things in place now to help people. But important to kind of try to follow and at least do as much as you can to prevent one from occurring. Okay, so these are probably the most common signs and symptoms that we see following a concussion. And it's not anyone's job here to memorize all of these, okay? But what I would tell you is if you experience any one of these, okay, literally any single one of them, it's at least concerning and at least enough indication that you should be checked out and evaluated for a possible concussion. What I usually tell people is if you feel off or if you feel like something is wrong or different about the way you're feeling after you get up from a blow or after you've taken a shot to the head, that's enough for me to at least say, let's get you checked out and make sure we don't have a concussion. Okay, again, it's not about memorizing exactly what the symptoms are. Most people just tell me, hey, doc, I just don't feel like myself right now. Something feels wrong. Great, let's get you evaluated and figure out what's going on. Maybe it's nothing, but that's enough indication for me to avoid anything like a TUA situation. But these are kind of your run-of-the-mill concussion symptoms if those exist. And everybody's does present a little bit differently, by the way. So you could have any number of these. I always think it's important to note some of the more red flags that we see when it comes to this injury. So any one of these signs or symptoms here is an immediate trip to the emergency room. Okay, these are the emergent warning signs. We don't have to go through each one of them separately. Most of these are indicating something worse than a concussion. Okay, concussion is an injury to the brain, again, that results in that temporary loss of normal functions. It is treatable. It is not emergent care that is required from a concussion. But this might indicate that you have either a bleed on the brain or perhaps a fracture of the skull. Something else has occurred that is causing any one of these symptoms here, and that's an immediate trip to the ER, no questions asked. But I would also, one of the reasons I really like to put this up here, if you don't have one of these symptoms, you don't need to go to the ER. And I think that's where a lot of parents, and I totally get it too, I've got a 3-month-old at home right now too, and I can't imagine him getting his head ever in any kind of danger. A lot of parents want to rush to the emergency room though when it happens, and the reality is if you have a concussion and it's not one of these signs, you're going to sit there for 5-6 hours, they're going to bring you back for like a 15-minute appointment or evaluation and say, great, you have a concussion, head home and rest. So I'm on like a one-man crusade to try to help people not have to go to the ER when they don't have to, because it can be a disaster. And you're exposing yourself to a whole bunch of other stuff there anyway. So this is your sign. You take a picture of this, store it away. If you don't have one of these, don't go. Come see a specialist or a doctor the following day is just fine. Okay. I always want to include a little bit about this because it's kind of a hot topic nowadays. There is a lot of interest in what can happen. What are the long-term ramifications, let's say, of multiple concussions? The reality is this. By and large, having one or more concussions, 2, 3 concussions, does not necessarily put you at greater risk for any sort of long-term damage or problems, okay? There is no magic number. Everyone always kind of asks me how many is too many. I wish there was a magic number. It would make my job so easy if there was just one number we had to look out for. But the reality is this injury is very different for different people. And what I'm looking for more so than anything is how recently have you sustained the concussions in quick succession, okay? So have there been multiple in one season? Have you had like 3 or more in 1 year? That's concerning to me because I'm wondering, okay, one, why is this happening again and again? Is the brain a little bit more vulnerable at this point? What's being missed? Did we ever fully recover last time? And I'm also looking for, did the recovery get worse with each successive concussion? Okay, is it taking longer to get better? That has a little bit more long-term implications for a vulnerable brain, perhaps a brain that should not continue to have any sort of head injury. There's something going on with that recovery. And finally, is it causing less and less impact to sustain a concussion? Okay, is it taking less force for you to feel the symptoms come back again? I have a great story for this one. I've been working with an Olympic gymnast recently. She came to see me after her 20th concussion. She had basically no care for the first 19 at all. Came to find me for her 20th concussion. The reason she decided to come seek help was she was practicing by her pool, and she dove into the water head first. And when her head broke the plane of the water, she came up with concussive symptoms. Okay, that was the force that she needed at that point to cause a concussion. She was 24 years old, 20 concussions later. That's what that looks like. Obviously, we don't ever want to let it get anywhere near something like that, but that's when we're talking about some very serious long-term implications. And of course, we had to talk about retirement, and she's now done because she simply cannot strike her head against anything again, at least for a very long time. So again, I don't want people to worry about multiple unless these are some of the things that are occurring. And at that point, hopefully you are seeing somebody and you've had some counseling and some discussion and some rehab prior to that, ever getting to that point. Again, you can kind of read through some of these as well, but there is no magic number is the main takeaway. Okay, quick myth or fact. A concussion can be diagnosed with a brain scan. I didn't go over this specifically, but it's a good one. What do we think? Can it be diagnosed with a brain scan? Someone brave. See at least one head shaking. It cannot be diagnosed with a brain, at least not the common brain scans that you'll be getting at an emergency room. Okay, there's some interesting newer ones being developed nowadays, but if you go to an ER and you get a CAT scan or you get an MRI, they are not doing that to diagnose a concussion. They're doing that to rule out something far worse than a concussion. Okay, there is no brain scan that's currently FDA approved that diagnoses this injury on the spot. Loss of consciousness always means it's a worse injury. This is a good one. Yeah, good. It's a myth. That's right. Now, the key word, of course, is always, okay? Yeah, that's you. It does not always indicate that. In fact, there's some really interesting evidence that losing consciousness might even be a protective factor for some brains. So if you think about it, the brain is attempting to go through a very rapid repair process after a head injury occurs. And keeping you conscious, keeping you awake, expends a lot of energy. And the brain needs energy to repair itself. So there's some interesting evidence that possibly going unconscious, having you be in an unconscious state is actually a protective factor so the brain can go through a rapid repair process and potentially even recover faster. I've actually had some athletes come to me with what appear to be significant, 5 minutes even out on the ground, and they recover in less than a week. I mean, it can be astounding. It does not always mean that it's the case, though. And of course, I would always get it checked out because loss of consciousness can mean that there's a worse injury like a bleed on the brain. So you would still go get that checked out, but I don't want you to necessarily feel like that means the injury is far worse no matter what. Finally, immediate removal can prevent a more serious injury. This one's easy. Fact, right? We will get, it seems easy now, but this was not the case even 15, 20 years ago. People didn't even miss time. I mean, you went right back in. It was smelling salts, how many fingers, and get back out there, rub some dirt on it. It's a totally different injury now, and you guys, clearly we understand it a lot better. But it's just we're not that far removed from that not being such an obvious myth or a fact. All right, last little section here. What does the recovery look like? What we understand now about this injury is you want to slowly but surely return to some semblance of your normal activity. Okay, so early on, you come see me at a clinic, let's say, when your symptoms are really bad. I like to get people in the day of, ideally. We do a lot of rest. Okay, first 24, 48 hours, I don't want people doing a whole lot. However, once you can tolerate it, once the symptoms are low enough, let's say, and you can start moving again and you start feeling a little bit better, I want to get that person up and active and doing some semblance of their normal activity. Okay, it's going to start at like a lower level. We kind of say this red to green progression, right? As symptoms get better or symptoms go down, we start to do more and more and more. And ideally what we're doing is we're kind of building back up until we're at a point where we're almost doing our normal activity, be it sport, school, work. And ideally you get cleared at that point and then you can go back and it's an easy transition. Okay, we no longer ask people to stay home in a dark room for 2 weeks. All right, they used to do that all the time. That was like the common thing to do. And the reality is that actually made the injury take longer to get better because the brain is incredibly resilient and the brain likes to adapt to its environment. And so if you put a brain in a dark room and say, don't do anything for 2 weeks, the brain's not going to do a whole lot for that 2 weeks. Okay, it's going to make very little progress in its recovery. So we want to get the brain active, right? You guys are athletes. We want to get you moving again and we want to get blood flow going back to the brain. So this is the red to green progression. Sometimes it even, oh, that's the wrong way. Sometimes it can seem shocking how quickly we move, but this is very similar. This is the New Jersey state law. So if you get a concussion during any sport, you must pass through these 6 stages. You can see here, again, this is the one I made, so it's obviously using red to green. The Jersey law does not have it in such pretty colors. But we want to start very limited. This is what I work on with my athletes, and we move through each of these stages at least 24 hours on each stage. All right, so who's some quick math here? What's the absolute fastest you could be back from a concussion if you move through all of these immediately each day? 6 days, right. And how long did they let Tua come back? 4 days. 4 days later. It was a Sunday game, Thursday was the injury. So at least 6 days, call it 1 week, right? Because you probably didn't come in and start stage 1 the very first day with me. But that's your absolute minimum amount of time that you could spend during a return to play protocol. Usually it's a little bit longer than that, but important to see what you must go through. And if you find yourself or if someone is telling you to go back sooner, that should be a red flag, right? That something's off there. I shouldn't be back right away. I need to get this checked out or something else is at foot. Okay, finally, just a return to learn. A lot of this injury presents itself in very different ways. Some people have trouble with their concentration afterward. They might have visual changes. They might have cognitive changes. There's a lot of different presentations, and really, I've been doing this for a long time, seen thousands of concussions at this point, and no 2 of them are identical. So we like to put things in place to help accommodate students in school to make that an easier transition, because again, the main goal is to get you back and get you in the classroom doing your normal activity, but with some help, so it's a little bit lighter. It's a little bit easier to get through it. Okay, I'm not going to go through all this right now, but if you do, sometimes the injury requires a little bit more active rehab or a little bit more what we would call ocular motor or vestibular rehabilitation. That's basically eye movement and balance rehab. And so we offer those at our clinic as well. And I work with these gentlemen as well who do a lot of vestibular rehab at the PT offices as well. It can be very important. It's one of the reasons to get evaluated by a specialist who actually knows about the injury. The reality is a lot of providers who don't see it all the time might actually miss something like this. And this can be a very easy rehab process to go through as long as it's identified and as long as you start early. Okay, the real goal when it comes to anything like this is starting as soon as possible. I don't want to waste any time when it comes to a brain injury. Okay, last one. Everyone recovers from a concussion in 1 month. This is a good one. Myth, that's right. That is a myth. Most people do. About 80%, 90% of people should recover within that 1 month period, okay? But not everyone does. It doesn't necessarily mean something's wrong or it's going to be a problem later on in life, but things do occur and sometimes the recovery takes a little bit longer. And again, I find more often than not, it's because something was missed early on and so that person didn't get the care or treatment that they needed. Physical exertion is a useful recovery tool. Yeah, good. This is a good group and everybody gets these. That is a fact. That's right. And that's why we talked about that red to green progression, right? It's important to get somebody moving again. We want to get the heart rate back up. Getting your heart rate up gets more oxygenated blood flow going to the brain. And that the brain then uses that, turns it into energy, and the healing process moves quicker. So we like physical activity. We start slow. We start on a stationary bike. We move up to light jogging or stretching, maybe some lifting, some body weight, and you slowly progress further using exertion all the while. Finally, super easy at this point, right? Initial recovery should be 2 weeks in a dark room. Altogether, yes, that's a myth. If anyone tells you to stay home and do nothing in a dark room, don't listen. Come find a provider that tells you not to do that, because it really is not helpful. And in fact, it can be detrimental to the recovery at this point. It's very well understood that that is the case. I think that's probably the end. Yeah. Questions for either of us at this point? Yeah. You can stand up too.
Is there a significant difference statistically in knee injuries on turf or grass field?
Great question. That is a very good question. Statistically significant talking about research? No. Anecdotally, absolutely. So it's like the biggest, like, everybody's talking about it right now, especially after Aaron Rodgers went down. They're like, this turf, it's hurting everybody. I think that athletes are probably more comfortable playing on grass, and I think that the turf surface is a little less forgiving. Our research right now does not have anything conclusive to say that it is significantly different. Yes.
Do shoes play a role in that?
Yes. When we talk about sports, the most important thing that we look for is the athlete to be comfortable in the shoe.